the second of our winter panel discussions where Oil Free Wellington is running. Today we're going to focus on structural issues within the food system, how we produce food, how our current system is problematic, and how we might imagine a more sustainable and just food system. So a bit of background for those of you who don't know Oil Free Wellington. We were formed about 3 years ago in response to the drilling permits in the Pegasus Basin. That's just off our coastline. So our primary focus has been working to resist oil drilling, the development of oil drilling in our region, working alongside other groups across the country and internationally.
Can you speak up, please?
Sure, sorry. So that's might appear quite a narrow focus, but we've always aimed to have a much broader focus, conscious of the fact that the work we're doing is just one part of a much wider struggle. So several of our members came out of a group called Climate Justice Wellington, that's informed our approach a lot. And from the beginning we've had a very strong climate justice kaupapa. A big part of that is meant that we take a very intersectional approach. We recognise that climate change is not an isolated problem that can be solved by technological fix, but symptomatic of some very deep and fundamental problems to do with our economic system and deep-seated inequalities of power. Climate change is just one part of a plethora of interrelated social and ecological crises. And if we're going to work effectively and meaningfully, we need to recognise that. So looking at food and climate, I think that's certainly the case. Food is completely intertwined with both ecology and culture. And I think we often forget how central food is to our existence. You know, not only is it necessary for survival, but to a massive extent how we source our food shapes how we live and how our communities function. So I'm really excited. I think it's a very important discussion to be having. What I'm particularly interested in teasing out tonight is how food production might be a transformative space in confronting these crises. If we're looking at cultural transformation and structural change, which I think we need to be, then food systems seem a really exciting and fundamental place to start. So before I pass over to Rome, just some housekeeping stuff. We've got toilets are out that door and up 2 flights of stairs, so it's a bit of an adventure. But just pop out if you need to. There's food, hopefully you've already helped yourself. We will have a slight break later on in the evening to get some more, but feel free to help yourself at any time. There's also a little koha thing. If you have any money would like to give it to us, that would be great. We also have a sign-up sheet up the back there. We've got lots of exciting plans for the summer, and if you'd like to get involved or receive updates about the actions we're doing, then put your name down there and we'll be in touch.
And please take a loaf of bread with you when you go. We've got so much bread. Alright, so we're going to start off, get a really quick intro from each of the panellists, and then we're going to jump straight into your questions. So if you'd like to start.
Hi everyone, Tim Packer. I've been involved in permaculture for the last 2 decades or more. I've been trained in various disciplines: organics, biodynamics, permaculture, and conventional farm nutrient management. Currently chairman of Innermost Community Gardens up at Marjorie Bank Street.
I'll keep mine short too. My name's Gary Williams. I also have a permaculture background. My professional work is as a water and soil engineer, but I'm not here because of that, I don't think actually. And we do have a small property north of Otaki, which we are trying to grow food in a way that's similar to natural systems, and it's much more organic. I've had quite an interest in, I've been straight to an engineer, but in social systems, economic systems, governance, and issues like that for a long time as well.
Hi, I'm Mike Joy, otherwise known as Dr. Doom. I teach environmental science at Massey University in Palmerston, and I started out as a freshwater ecologist, but then soon discovered that our freshwaters were in such decline that I turned into an angry activist. And, so I spend most of my time being angry now and not doing so much science.
Kia ora everyone, my name is Julia Milne. I run the Community Project Aotearoa, which is a urban farm development based at a northern south school, called School in Northern. I have a special interest in working with communities who where creating change is a real challenge, and I think in order to solve some of these really big issues that we've got, particularly around climate change, we need to remember that the call to action from those who are having a experience of poverty and deprivation is really important, and that no one gets there until we all get there together, and that's very much the focus of my work at the and
My name is Sarah Adams, and I am a community and neighbourhood advisor at Wellington City Council, and I have the urban agriculture portfolio. So I work with all the community garden groups and people who want to grow food across the city. And prior to that, I worked at Innermost Gardens, and Gary was my permaculture teacher.
Cool. Yeah, quick round. Okay, so we've got a series of questions, and some panelists have indicated which questions they'd like to answer. Depends on how the time works out, we might have time for questions from the audience, but maybe not. So we're kind of going to play that part by ear. So start off with, we actually had a couple of questions. The first two questions you guys have seen were kind of identical, so we're kind of merged into one. So feel free to go over time with your responses. The question is, how sustainable are our current farming and or fishing practices? What impact are we having on soil, water ecosystems, and on the climate? So, I'm going to start with Mike. That's right.
Yeah. I mean, I could spend a week talking about the impacts of agriculture, of intensive agriculture, of industrial agriculture, which is the model that we have here. Not so much, I guess, climate change. We have to realise that livestock or animal agriculture is responsible for more greenhouse gas emissions than transport and the other things that we tend to, in energy that we tend to concentrate on. And it's much more doable for everybody to be able to shift their diet and make a much bigger difference than they potentially could by other changes they can do. But I guess that if I want to talk about that, just my little bit about the impacts of intensive farming in New Zealand, then I need to just quote a few figures, and most of these numbers, these scary numbers, are related to agriculture. If we think about dairy in this country, 6.8 million dairy cows, each cow producing, well, the waste equivalent of at least 14 humans, but up to 44 depending on what you're looking at. So effectively, just looking at dairy cows, we have a population of 90 million humans in this country. So when you think about all that waste, and it's not going through wastewater treatment plants, the biggest issues are sediment and nutrients. The biggest of the nutrients is nitrogen, and it mostly comes from urine. So the urine patches from the cows, it's those cows pouring out big volume of urine into a small space. The plants, the grass can't take it up. It goes down, makes its way into groundwater, lakes and rivers that way. And that's what the issue is. No amount of planting out riverbanks makes any difference to that, and that's the biggest issue. So now we have 62% of the length of all of the waterways in New Zealand are not safe to swim in. That's from pathogens, and most of that comes from agriculture. 44% of all of our lakes of the monitored ones, and the modelling shows all of our lakes have flipped into another state because they have excess nutrients. They can't handle the nutrients, they start growing algae, you get all the responses that come from that. 96% of our lowland waterways exceed the standard for swimming, the health standard for swimming, for pathogens, and more than 80% of our lowland waterways exceed any of the guidelines we have for nutrients as well. And if I had a PowerPoint, I would show you a map of New Zealand, and you would be able to see exactly where those issues are. They're in the intensively farmed areas. So the dairy farmed areas of New Zealand is where that's all happening. The other part of this is not related to freshwater, but is related to intensive agriculture, and is a really scary thing because it affects our food security in the future, is heavy metals. So we've got this massive issue in this country with cadmium. So starting in the 30s, we destroyed Nauru Island and brought it to New Zealand basically, and turned it into its phosphate, it's guano that got built up over thousands of years, so bird shit that we bought here, spread on the land to intensify to be able to carry all these cows we have at the moment. And so now we have this legacy where we have, so for example, I'll take the Waikato, an intensively farmed area where there has been a bit of honest work done. Most of the regional councils have covered up or avoided this, but there was one individual there that made sure that this got out. Back in 2004, 160,000 hectares exceeded the limit, which makes it a biohazard. That is, the soil had more than 1 part per million cadmium. Cadmium's an issue, I hope you realise, because it's a carcinogen, a known carcinogen. Plants take it up, we eat it. The cows eat the grass. It doesn't go to milk. That's why we still sell our milk overseas. It builds up in the organs of the livestock. They don't live long enough to die of cancer. We knock them on the head before they could have died of cancer. And this brings in another issue, because the organs can't be sold for human consumption. So guess where they go? Well, there's two. We knew there was two likelihoods. One is pet food, and one is blood and bone fertiliser, which you may, and we haven't proven that one, but we have proven the Massey vet listened to one of my talks a few years ago talking about this. He got onto the biggest pet food manufacturer in New Zealand, tested their product, found really high levels of cadmium in it. He did a bunch of tests on wild cats, and cadmium was virtually unmeasurable in wild cats and really high in domestic cats. They've been running a trial to try and see, but the pet food company would only fund a 6-month trial, so it's kind of like one of those trials that doesn't really tell you anything, because we don't expect anything to happen in 6 months anyway. But okay, so that's one issue. Ministry of Primary Industries and Ministry for Health do a, what do they call it, the intake study. They look at what New Zealand, every 5 years they do a total intake study, and they look at what we're eating and they analyse it. And when they did that study, the most recent one, which was 2009, we are due for a new one here. All of the children, so they break them up into toddlers and other age groups, but everybody up to the age of 17 exceeded the European Union standard for cadmium in their food. The adults weren't quite on the limit. Luckily or unluckily for us, we in New Zealand have the World Health Organization standard, which is more lax than the European Union one. But I would have more faith in the European Union one, because it's just been fought through the courts. Of course, the agriculturists, industrial agriculturists tried to fight it. It's been through a massive court battle, and the European Union still stands the amount that you're allowed to safely have in your food. So all of our kids are exceeding that limit, and interestingly, only about half of their food comes from New Zealand. So I don't know if the other food's worse than ours. I know that some of our potatoes are showing up as exceeding. But the issue is that all you can do with that land afterwards is grow trees on it, or cows and milk, because you won't be able to eat the produce that comes from it because of that cadmium issue. So, that's a real nightmare that we've got to handle, that has come already. We've got the water issues, the soil compaction issues. Intensive agriculture has had some, and is having, really big impacts, and the climate change one as well is huge.
Cool, thanks for that. Tim, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I suppose just a few quotes as well. I think Vandana Shiva, actually, she was here a couple of months ago, and there was a quote she made that actually surprised me, and that was that we're talking industrial agriculture again, once again, not just agriculture. Industrial agriculture only produces 30% of the world's food, and yet consumes 70% of the land and 70% of the waste it produces, right? So we're into systems that are consuming a lot and producing an awful lot of waste. So we're losing our natural capital, and I think that's one of the bigger issues, is we're losing our safe buffer zones. World Wildlife Fund Living Planet report, just towards the end of last year. In the last 30 years, we've lost 50% of our land-based invertebrates. Right? Water-based invertebrates we've lost 76% of. So we're losing our natural capital, and because of that, we're actually losing all our biodiversity. And because of that, all our systems aren't actually functioning that well, and that's why we're starting to see all these imbalances. And we're seeing these climate change scenarios It's because the planet's trying to basically balance itself out. It's